We don't want everybody to become 10% more productive because that's a little squishy. We want 10% of the people to become 100% more productive so they can go do other things.
Hi, data and AI friends. We are at a generational shift. Some might even say a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. To capitalize on this opportunity, you need more than just great technology. You need a mindset shift. That's why I'm proud to say that ThoughtSpot sponsors this podcast. Go from raw data to trusted insights and action with ThoughtSpot Agentic Analytics, a platform powered by a suite of specialized AI agents. It's why companies like Cisco, Lyft, T-Mobile, Sephora, and Schneider Electric count on ThoughtSpot. See what the future of analytics looks like at thoughtspot.com. Welcome to the Data and AI Chief. I'm your host, Cindy Housen. What if the person accountable for your data strategy was also the person accountable for the business results that depends on that data strategy? For most organizations, it's two different people. For Saugata Saha, it's one and the same. Today, we're joined by Saugata Saha, president of S&P Global Market Intelligence and S&P Global's Chief Enterprise Data Officer. Saugata is one of the few executives who oversees both a major business division and the entire enterprise data strategy behind it. In this episode, you'll learn what it actually takes to turn a vast data estates into connected, AI-ready intelligence, and how to turn AI investment into measurable business impact, and why the data foundation remains the make or break challenge for every data leader right now. Saugata, welcome to the Data and AI Chief.
Cindy, delighted to be here and thanks for having me.
Yeah, now we'd like to give our listeners a possibility to travel around the world with us. So where are you joining us from today?
Today I'm here in our offices in downtown New York, and it's
Yes,
pretty nice and sunny outside.
one of my favorite cities in the world, of course. But I hear you also made a trip to Davos recently.
Yes, I was there earlier this year, which feels like a distant memory at this point. It was, exciting as it always is. It was a great learning experience hearing, people talk about everything that matters in the world. And I will distinctly remember it for being the coldest Davos I've ever been to.
Oh boy. Well, I used to ski in Davos way back when. It was definitely not the coldest Davos, but for sure it was super cool and meaningful to see for you and me who have been in this space a long time that AI is a headline. It's no longer an afterthought. And so if we look at your career, a fascinating background, you spent a long time at McKinsey giving people advice, co-developing strategies. What sparked you to make the move to be an operator, let's say, at S&P Global?
To get the full gist of that story, we'd have to actually go back to my pre-McKinsey careers. So I was born and raised in India. After college, I spent about 7 years working for a large industrial conglomerate where I essentially had operator roles. I did sales, I did product development for one of our B2B e-commerce products, and I spent some time doing business development and strategy for the chairman of the company. Then, little late in life, I decided to go to business school, move to the US, and after that, I went to work at McKinsey and Company, where I was having a blast. I was serving financial services companies and also fintech companies. And one of the fintech companies I was serving back then was a small company known as, it was relatively small back then, was McGraw-Hill Companies, which was a predecessor company to S&P Global. And while working with the company, I got to know the management team pretty well. Jack Callahan, who was the CFO, Martina Chung, who had multiple roles, including head of strategy. And then, of course, Doug Peterson, who was the CEO back then. And I made the transition from McKinsey to S&P Global mostly because of Doug's vision of what he wanted to do with the company. Just for scale and reference, when I joined the company about 12 years ago, the market cap was probably 15 to $18 billion, something in that range. And, a little over a decade, the company at one point was 150 billion in market cap. So quite a transformative journey. And that's what was exciting, that we can transform this business, realize its full potential. And that's what got me from McKinsey to S&P Global.
Yeah, what an amazing story and trajectory and growth. Congratulations on that. Now, if I think of the data and AI leaders out there listening, some of them get a little bit beat up in the role. And yet you have elevated it to you actually own the business outcomes. How do the synergies between having a data and AI strategy and owning the outcomes work together?
So I'd like to start by reminding your listeners that for us at S&P Global, data is not an afterthought. It is our stock in trade. That's what we do. We sell several tens of $billion worth of data every year. So it's imperative that we get it right. And for us, capturing business value from the data is not option. That's what we got to do to kind of, deliver value to our customers. So there's a couple of things to think about, as we think about data strategy and the connectivity to business strategy. You hit the core of the matter, Cindy, in your question, which is data strategy and business strategy have to be very tightly connected. And if they are not, that's when value capture does not happen. In fact, I would go so far as to say data strategy actually follows from business strategy. So I think about strategy in a somewhat of a classical manner where I start with a few ingredients. One is, where is the world headed? What prognostications can we make about what the world will look like in 2, 3, 5 years? Second is around, where do we think customers have the biggest pain points? What are some of the pain points we can help them solve? And then the third thing is, what capabilities and distinctive attributes does our business have? What helps us create value for customers like nobody else can? And you think to put the three together, you take the three together and you define your business strategy. So this is what we will do to create outsized value for our customers, our employees, our shareholders, and so on and so forth. And once you're done with that, I think about data strategy. So what is the data strategy we need to make that happen? So if you think about us as a company, we outlined our business strategy pretty clearly around areas where we see we're going to, create outsized value. And then in November of last year, we had a big investor day where we told investors what the strategy is, how we see the business evolving over the next 3 to 5 years, what financial goals that translates to. Simultaneously, we started developing a data strategy. And if you think about our data strategy, or if I kind of, summarize it, it has 4 parts to it. The 4 key pillars are growth, speed, efficiency, and quality, right? And growth is essentially about bringing data from different parts of the company together, creating new use cases, bringing in new data sets from outside, creating new use cases, and helping drive the business strategy's growth. The speed is essentially about compressing time, and their AI is a big friend in terms of how we can compress the time to market with data. Quality is essentially, well, as the name says, reduce error rates, make sure there's appropriate governance, all of that stuff. And then, of course, there's a whole thing about efficiency and productivity where we want to make sure that we can do the same thing faster. And as we've kind of gone down this journey, we've also found that it's not just about doing the same thing faster, Cindy. In many instances, we can do things with new technology that weren't even possible in the past.
Yeah.
So I know I've said quite a bit, so let me pause. Does that make sense?
And oh, absolutely. And so there are a few key points that you made that I think can be different for some listeners or the same. One, you're a data business. That is how you make your money. So if I picture a large bank or another financial services organization, data is only a small part and their core is different. Could be better. Agree?
I would strongly disagree, and here's why. So my former boss, Doug Peterson, who was the former CEO of the company, he used to have this line that every company is an energy company because no matter what you do,
Oh,
you
yes.
consume a lot of energy, right? By extension, I like to say that every company out there is a data company because you're generating a lot of data, but whether you're getting value out of an it or not is up to the company and its management team. So the first step in getting value out of data that companies generate as a course of their day-to-day business is about defining what value you want to capture from it. And that comes from the business strategy. So I think where a lot of companies whose core business is not data, and that's very, very small subset of companies like us whose core business is data. I think where we go, where these companies go wrong is they start treating the value capture from data as an optional, right? And I think the change that needs to happen is that companies that need to start thinking of the value capture from the data that they generate as an important part of the value creation story, an important part of the business strategy, and then focus everybody on figuring out how we take the data that we have as a company and create value from it. And I think very few companies do that very successfully.
For sure, for sure. So let me rephrase. You can sell data as a product, whereas others, that will be secondary. The primary might be improving customer loyalty using data. Is that a fair nuance?
Yes. I mean,
Okay.
companies are sitting on so much data,
We
which
are.
not being harnessed, which is not being utilized. I think part of it is because nobody's really showed them the value of what can be done. It's a two-way street. Somebody needs to, at these companies, needs to articulate the value that can be created with this data, which is sitting there. And someone needs to buy into that story. So someone on the data leadership has to, or the technology leadership, depending on how the company is structured and organized, has to demonstrate the vision of what that could look like. And somebody on the business side has to say, this could be another 30 cents of EPS. Let's go get it. And
Yeah.
then what does it take for business and the technology teams to come together and go get that value?
Yeah, and it is that integration of business and technology or business and data. So the other point you made is that the data strategy should follow the business strategy. I would also say in this time of incredible innovation, it's the people that understand what's possible with AI should help the business reimagine things. We often, in large organizations, have a disconnect here. The data strategy team will go off, and some of the strategies I look at, I would describe more as a technology strategy rather than a true data and AI strategy. So you are able to bridge it because you own both roles. If you were to put your consulting hat back on, what would you advise either the business leader or the data leader to do better to get these things more tightly integrated?
So my first advice would be that try not to think of, data strategy at too much of an arm's length from business strategy or the overall value creation strategy. And here's why. For most large organizations, the data strategy flows from the quality of data that the organization has internally, right? And very often that tends to be the biggest challenge. Data sets are not complete. Data sets are, have varying levels of quality. They're inaccurate, etc. And I'll give you, just to make it tangible for your listeners, I'll give you a few examples. So let's say, somebody on the data team comes up with a brilliant idea that we can mine all the data that sits in our CRM software, the company, whichever it is, Salesforce, Dynamics, etc. And we can do predictive analytics around when a customer cancel can happen. So we take data from CRM, we take click data, user usage and, customer web click data, and we combine it and get those insights. Turns out that most companies, the CRM data is of, modest quality because the sales teams don't have a huge amount of incentive to go populate those fields, and it's not really usable, so it becomes a bit of a chicken and egg problem. And you need a vision that we can build this capability if we had all that data. Therefore, to build this capability a year from now, we just need to start populating those data sets now. And that's the leadership journey which the company needs to be on, which is why I said the story happens when somebody sees the vision, can sell the vision, somebody on the business side sees the vision, is willing to buy the vision, and that's when magic happens. So goes back to what you were saying at S&P Global. I have a role on the business side. I have a role on the running data side. And sometimes I have to convince myself wearing the other hat. And I'm bald, so I wear lots of hats. But sometimes I have to convince my other colleagues who run other divisions about, here's the value proposition. If we do X, there's value down the road in terms of Y. It generally does not work if, heads of data assume that the model which doesn't work well inside a large company is if you build it, they will come.
Oh, yes, never. And so there's a lot there to unpack, Sagata. Let's talk a little bit about the data specifically at S&P Global that you manage. So it's one of the largest financial data repositories in the world. Structured data, unstructured data, public data for publicly traded organizations, private data as well. But scale alone does not necessarily lead to intelligence. What has been hard and what has been easy about making this data useful?
The easiest part in all of this is to go have a customer conversation where you can kind of, lay out a vision for what you want to do and get customers buy-in, because everyone is struggling with how do you take data, create new insights. The world's getting more complex. Decisions are getting more complex, not easier. And everybody needs more elegant solutions with complex data to be able to get the decision support insights that you need. So that's the easy part. The hard part is to make all this data talk together, connect them, create new capabilities which work in the world of AI that we live in, metadata, semantic layers, graph databases. And I won't go into much detail. I know several of your guests on prior podcasts have talked about these in a lot of data in detail, but building all that out is hard. And then, of course, packaging it in a way and delivering it away to our customers that's quickly out of the box usable is takes a fair amount of effort. And then the last thing I would say is kind of making sure that we are building data sets which solve the problems of tomorrow. And that's hard too, because we can't go create in, in spite of our size and scale, we can't go create or track down every data set out there. So we've got to be thoughtful around which are going to be some of the highest value add data sets in the future. And the last thing I would say is that the scale with private markets is much, much bigger. So just for your listeners, for a sense of scale, Cindy, we cover about 80,000 plus public companies globally. We cover north of 20, 30 million private companies, and that's not even the universe.
Yeah, yeah.
A different scale. And AI is our friend there because AI lets us do things through autonomous agents that would be impossible to do if we had humans trying to crunch and analyze all that private market data.
Yeah, and there was a really insightful commentary in this weekend's Wall Street Journal about how the size of the private markets have grown. And you look at the potential valuation of these mega IPOs. Who's going to go first? OpenAI, Anthropic, who knows? And if you just go back 10 years ago, we had more publicly held companies. We're roughly half now, and Amazon was able to IPO. I know you're going to know the numbers cold versus me, but it was something like only 60 million in revenue. And today it's like they're IPOing with billions in revenue. So a very different time and a need for better access to whatever data is available. So one of the companies that I understand S&P Global recently acquired is With Intelligence, and that has a lot of private market data. How do you integrate that at the scale that you already had for, let's say, the public market data?
Great question. So with Intelligence, Cindy is a London-based company, which, their data sets are global. They track what's happening in private company markets along with, investors, GPs, LPs, private equity, private credit. They track deal flows. So the entire value chain of what's happening in private marketing investing. it's a very, very differentiated and precious data set. And it kind of gives us a leading position in serving clients on their, you know, private market data needs. Our strategy with data has been twofold. One is we have our own web-based platforms that customers access data on. For example, Capital IQ Pro is probably the most well-known one. And then we also distribute through a lot of third-party channels, Snowflake, Databricks, our own API, data feeds, etc. So we never want to be in the business of telling people that if you want to consume our data, you got to come here. We are like, if it's a mainstream channel, we'll make it available. So what we are doing, the work that we are doing right now in the back end is mapping the with intelligence data sets to our existing data sets and creating one universal access model so customers can access the data in a linked manner through any of our channels. Now, of course, this is much easier said than done because the data sets that come in from with intelligence and the data sets that we have, even if it's the same company in both those data sets, the names could be spelled slightly differently. They don't have any unique company identifier, etc. That's where we use our more complex AI-driven logic to kind of match those data sets. And we're talking about millions of records. Trying to do it the old-fashioned way with a data analyst, working through the databases would have been nearly impossible. And this is also not fuzzy matching where we are looking at partial logic. We are using real AI to kind of match and link those data sets. And what this does in this instance is it compresses our time to market pretty dramatically. And it also makes it much more affordable for us to do it in a way that we can deliver an affordable service to our customers. So that's the journey we are on. But we are thrilled with some of these new capabilities that we've built, which helps us integrate these data sets at scale.
Yeah, and so Saugata, as you're describing that, I'm picturing merger and acquisition used to always be a nightmare for cleaning the master data and combining the systems. It sounds like with AI that has gotten easier. Any other advice for organizations still going through this modernization era?
I would say number one advice for companies in general, and this is not just for the chief data officers or the heads of technology, because then I'm preaching to the converted. The number one advice is stop treating data as an afterthought or byproduct, but start thinking about data as a key ingredient for value creation and competitive advantage. Because if a company can really use data at scale for better decision making, better client service, etc., better outcomes, that creates a lasting, edge over the competition. It's often been said that data is the new oil, right? I've heard that term over the last 10 years. The problem here is, oil is a lot easier to refine than data is. With data, that capability is still in very, very small circles. And where it exists in organizations, it typically resides, and I've rarely seen it leave the confines of the chief data officer organization or the head of technology organization. And the business teams either aren't motivated or don't know how to work with the data teams to be able to capture value from their own data.
So, is your point that the data teams should be more embedded in the business units, kind of a hybrid, federated model? Or what's the solution here?
A good model I've seen work, and if I had my druthers and if I were doing this in a large public company whose core business is not selling data, a federated model where you have a team in the center, which is building the things that need to be built in scale, acquiring the tools, building the tools. You don't need to do it in 5 different places in a large company, but also have embedded teams with the businesses who understand the business and the business logic well enough to understand how the data can be used for value capture. What happens very often is that companies build a large central data team which has some incredibly talented people. They have all the right tools and capabilities, but there's so much of a disconnect between their understanding of the business and what actually happens in the deep, shop floor factories that they can never really identify how to create that value. So that federated model where you have teams embedded who can actually help connect the data to business outcomes is very important. It also, in my mind, doesn't work if you just have a bunch of federated teams, because then they don't have the scale to be able to leverage a lot of the capabilities which a large organization needs to do. And at some point, they kind of get crushed under their own weight. They're so small and embedded. And the last thing I would say is what's really important, Cindy, is that, the journey with data has a payoff period, which is not, trivial. That journey can take a year, it can take 2 years. So what it really requires is senior management's buy-in and a vision that we will invest in this and stay with it until we get value. If they start looking at this as a project that's going to deliver value in a quarter, nothing's going to happen. Nothing productive comes out of working with large data sets in a large organization in one quarter. And I think that's where a lot of projects die. So somebody needs to articulate that value, management needs to buy into that value. And then, obviously execution needs to happen. But I don't think execution is the biggest challenge, because I've seen lots of smart and incredibly talented teams within client organizations or, large organizations who can work on these problems.
Yeah, for sure. Execution is not the biggest challenge. You've given us good insights on an ideal organizational model, but your timeline, Sagata, we have to talk about this. So, to build a good data foundation, I agree it can take months, years, even. But if the business does not see glimmers of value along the way, that's when I believe they get frustrated. Or then it's like, CDAO, you're not moving quickly enough, and the job churns.
There's a solution for that.
Okay, tell us the solutions.
I think the solution is kind of what I'd call a bifocal vision of the future, right? Which is, a big part of your lens is reserved for looking at the long-term vision, the long-term value capture opportunity. And by long-term, I mean, call it 18, 36 months down the road. But a small part of the lens is reserved for looking at the near term. What are some of the quick wins I can deliver? And some of those quick wins might be relatively low on ROI, but it goes back to your point, which is, especially in an organization which is doing this for the first time, there is usually a big credibility gap. There is usually a bit of a, show me the money question, right? And CDOs or CDAIOs or, need to have a foot in the near term where they say, hey, here's a quick project. It's not a grand project, but it's going to deliver value in the next quarter, right? Um, I'll give you an example. Again, just going back to the sales analogy, you could plausibly build a tool. And again, this is an example. It depends on the organization, what they have, what data sets they have. You could build a tool that could predict customer churn over the next quarter, right? And if that tool works well, that's a nice victory, right? That's very tangible. That's very real. And the benefits from that are very real. While you're spending 80% of your resources building on some of those long-term, harder to crack problems, which deliver value in, 12, 18, 36 months. But I agree with you. You bring up a good point that, just staying focused on the long-term vision is essentially going to lead to lack of belief, people withdrawing their support and churn in the CDAO organization.
Yeah, I'm glad you referenced the quick wins. I often say, find a use case where the data is ready enough and the value is high enough. It may not be the highest, but get those quick wins. I want to go a little deeper on some of your views on AI experimentation, AI ROI. I heard your interview in Davos. You talked about where the real value is with AI. At the same time, we are seeing some AI washing with these mass job cuts. Tell us what's real. What should leaders be paying attention to here?
I'll talk a little about the journey we've been on with AI and where we are focusing on. The first part of that journey is around making sure that people who are potential users of this technology within an organization are trained and, given the skills to use the technology productively and also understand the limitations and challenges of the technology, which essentially gets you to what I'd call productive and responsible use of the technology. So the first component is the bringing people along, where you kind of train people and just make sure they have the skills to use these tools. The second is around making these tools available in contained firewall environments where employees can use them in a safe manner, which is consistent with the organization's risk appetite to drive experimentation, to understand how these tools work, to understand what these tools can't do, all of that. And then the third piece is around for some of the highest value use cases, building in these AI capabilities into the regular workflow tools that that employees use every day. And then the fourth part of the journey is to have some very deliberate action plans around how existing workflows get transformed into new workflows. That's important. I would say, the journey is one where if companies want to see productivity driven by AI, and, if productivity in large organizations is not a new thing. There have been many technologies going back many, many years which have driven productivity. But the productivity that, we'd expect to see from AI is one where, we don't want everybody to become 10% more productive because that's a little squishy. We want 10% of the people to become 100% more productive so they can go do other things, right? Reskill them, upskill them. And that's an important part of the journey. And without the fourth element, the fourth pillar that I talked about, which is a deliberate plan, that generally does not happen. Where organizations end up is that, yes, everybody became 10% more productive, but I'm not sure what's happening with that 10%. How does that create more value for our customers? Or, a better employee experience, or even more value for our shareholders. So I think that's kind of the journey in my mind, which takes to capture value from AI. And that's kind of the journey we are on. And that's what we are very focused on.
Yeah, your fourth pillar about modernizing existing workflows. Do you think most organizations are more focused on automating certain processes that we should just do away with those processes? Are we thinking big enough?
I would say, and this is where we've got to look a little into the future, Cindy. The holy grail, so as to speak, in the whole world of AI and productivity and how we think about that is what you might call straight through processing, which is, or agentic processing, which is work happens with zero human oversight, right? Work comes in, output is done, zero human oversight. There's some workflows which are trivial, which is, if you get that wrong 50% of the time, nothing's going to happen, right? But we are not at a place today or in the foreseeable future that any complex workflow can be done on a straight through processing basis, at least not in the, foreseeable future. Who knows what's going to happen 10 years from now, which means there'll always be humans in the loop, which means that AI will always, for the foreseeable future, be a tool that empowers humans to be more productive. And which is why I think the focus has to be you take an existing workflow, look at who's doing what, and then figure out how can humans continue to focus on the highest value added, most complex work in that workflow, while a lot of that other work can be done by agents slash automated. I will also say there's a bit of a difference in my mind, at least, between what I see as automation and new agentic workflows. And automation is not new to large organizations like us. We've been automating stuff for decades. The difference is with automation, you have deterministic outcomes. This is a process, put in A and B, you'll always get C. With AI driven or agentic workflows, the difference is that it's not always deterministic, or more often than not, it's not deterministic. It's probabilistic, which means I don't know exactly what outcome I'll get, but I have a good idea of it. And that works for certain outcomes. That doesn't work for many other outcomes. In the kind of businesses, for example, we are in, which is, people use our data to make extremely critical decisions. In that, having high quality output is very important. So for the foreseeable future, we'll have humans in the loop who'll be kind of, whose productivity will be supercharged with these new tools. And that's how we see the future evolve.
Yeah, good. So, as you look ahead, let's say 3 to 5 years, what does a truly AI native financial intelligence platform look like?
Ah, I love this. This is kind of think about the vision. So I think about a future where if you look at our flagship platform, Cap IQ Pro, a user shows up at the platform. The platform knows who the user is, and the platform tells the user, hey, these are the 5 things you need to know this morning. These are the 6 things you need to do this morning. And these are the 7 things you must keep in your radar this morning. And the user says, yes, I agree with all of that. And then the system gets a head start on doing some of that work. And then, the person, the analyst or the person using the platform can focus on creative solutioning of things that the machine's not thinking about. So a lot of the routine day-to-day stuff that people focus on really goes away, and humans can focus on more of the creative aspect of the job and problem solving, relationship building, thinking about the next set of problems to be solved, and they can focus on that. So that's kind of, how I'd love to see how the future evolves. But, I also think the answer is not monolithic. We have so many products that they're all going to evolve in very different ways. But what I can say for sure is that 3 years from now, 4 years from now, most of our products won't look like what they look today.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. Yes. There's a lot. Yeah. In the heart of Silicon Valley here, there's a lot that I see coming. But either way, the future you described sounds like a much more exciting and impactful workday and future. Saugata, let's shift a little bit to a fun, lighthearted lightning round. What do you enjoy doing outside of data and AI?
Oh boy, spending time with the family. We have 2 kids who are relatively young. I'm a bit of a enthusiast coder. I'm a bit of a nerd and a geek. So spending time with anything technology, love listening to music. Plenty of things to keep me busy. There's no dearth of filling of time. It's more like the shortage of time.
Yes. So, favorite music?
I love pop music from the 80s.
Oh, same. Okay. I should ask. I actually had to write an essay. What's a song that brings you back in time? Do you have a favorite one?
There isn't a song, but I'd say I love 80s music, especially European 80s music. ABBA
Okay.
is a great favorite.
Yes.
The song probably would be the one by Aha. Oh gosh, I'm having a senior moment now. What's the song called? Um, anyway, and that's partly because in my iTunes folder, it shows up at the top because Aha's at the top. So
Yeah.
anyway,
It just
Take
plays.
on Me. That's the song. Take on Me.
Oh, Take on Me. Yep.
Yeah.
Now I'm picturing like some discos and bars in college. Okay, let's get off that topic. How about someone famous or not that really inspires you?
And the last 12 years at the company have been a great journey. And, Doug Peterson, the former CEO who just retired, has been a huge inspiration into how to think about a business, building a team, how to coach and mentor and develop people, the whole leadership gamut. And he's been incredibly inspirational.
Very nice. How about a book or a podcast that has changed your way of thinking?
There's probably not one, but this is again the nerdy me. I'm a huge RSS reader. So, most of my news still comes on RSS feeds on my app. Yeah, I date myself. And I'm off the podcast. I really like Lex Friedman's podcasts. They tend to be long, and just given the amount of time I have to skip portions of it. But I find them really in depth and delve through a variety of different kinds of people, and there's so much to learn.
Oh, good. And Sagata, you decide the last question. Either something that you have accomplished in the last week that you are particularly proud of, or what are you most grateful for, maybe beyond the obvious of health and family?
I'll go with the second one. I'd say, the opportunity to live in the times that we do and just experience the change around us, and also have a role where I can have a meaningful impact on the lives of so many thousands of colleagues, and hundreds of thousands of customers who have come to rely on our products to, do what they need to do and grow and develop and be professionally successful. And I'm really grateful for that. And it's an incredible opportunity. And I, do this very humbly. And I'm just very grateful for just having the opportunity to do this.
And of course, we're grateful that you would share your journey, your insights, your best practices on this podcast. Thank you, Saugata.
Thank you, Cindy. Very nice talking to you.
If you enjoyed this conversation, please rate it or like it on your favorite podcast platform. And if you would like more inspiration and thought leadership, follow me on LinkedIn or visit the hub, dataandAIchief.com.